If Christ's God is El Elyon and Yahweh is Satan, then why is Christ constantly linked to men like Moses, who undoubtedly served Yahweh? The most obvious argument against El Elyon being the father of Christ and Yahweh being Satan, along with many of the other things I've discussed in previous videos, is constructed around the fact that the New Testament is built on the foundation of the Old Testament. Jesus is directly connected to the prophets like Moses, such as in the Transfiguration, and parallels to the prophets in the Old Testament are constantly drawn. These Old Testament prophets like Moses clearly served Yahweh. So if this is the case, how could Christ have spearheaded a Canaanite revitalization movement? And how could his God be El? The answer to this is surprisingly simple. Christ and his followers were a very small group of people in a very vulnerable position, looking to spread and thrive while minimizing persecution. Some of the truth inevitably had to be hidden. Imagine you were trying to spread the truth and in the same vulnerable position. If you were to be very overt about it, you would face massive repercussions. The truth couldn't be spread explicitly, of course. It had to be done secretively. Jesus used parables and symbolism to convey his message because they were more effective and allowed it to be spread without the hidden meaning being specified. If his message was overtly conveyed about Yahweh being a false god and El being a separate deity, it would have gotten shut down and wouldn't have spread to the extent that it did. In the Old Testament, there's a safeguard to prevent people from believing in Jesus or someone like him. It is commonly referenced by practicing Jews or those looking to denigrate Christ as a false prophet. One of your people, claiming to be a prophet or to have prophetic dreams, may predict a miraculous sign or an amazing thing. What he predicts may even take place. But don't listen to that prophet or dreamer if he says, "Let's worship and serve other gods." Those gods may be gods you've never heard of. Yahweh your Elohim is testing you to find out if you really love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul. Worship Yahweh your Elohim, fear him, obey his commands, listen to what he says, serve him, and be loyal to him. That prophet or dreamer must be put to death because he preached rebellion against Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of Egypt and freed you from slavery. He was trying to lead you away from following the directions Yahweh your Elohim gave you. You must get rid of this evil. The Jews were preemptively trying to safeguard against a Jesus-like figure, which they likely deemed the arrival of to be inevitable. This safeguard was another reason why Jesus couldn't specifically name El or confirm polytheism directly. Surely he would have been put to death a lot faster if he did. Christ knew he would die, but was able to delay death long enough to indirectly restore El's worship and reach people. He spread his message in a way that made it digestible to people. Jesus conveyed complex topics seamlessly through symbolism in a way that people were receptive to. It was brilliant. The way of Yahweh reflected a low level of consciousness and spoke to the banalist desires of humanity, lacking real virtue and spirituality, the procurement of resources at the expense of all else. The Bible was written by competing interests, some that still worshipped El instead of Yahweh, but they had to hide and conceal it so it survived in the texts. Any elements of truth that pointed to El as the original highest god of the Holy Land had to be craftily devised and woven into the Yahweh propaganda. There's a reason why Christ most frequently quoted Psalms. It's because Psalms has, on average, more elements of this than any other section of the Old Testament. The addition of the New Testament and the teachings of Christ to the Bible was a result of those who still worshipped El, indirectly turning people from the ways of Yahweh worship back to the ways of El's worship. A balance between simplicity, creativity, rationality, and brilliance is a hallmark of genius. Christ embodied all of these traits which helped him succeed. We can think of Yahweh's worship as a bug in the faith of the people of the Holy Land. The Israelites hijacked the Canaanite religion and poisoned people's minds with the sinister nature of Yahweh worship. Much that is known about the attributes of Yahweh can be learned through his biblical interactions with his people. In those interactions, Yahweh revealed himself as a genocidal monster. He is not the God that Jesus said he was sent by to save humanity. Yahweh was a splinter that pierced into the consciousness of Canaan. He cut deep and swiftly shattered Canaanite beliefs, deeply embedding himself in place of what was. Jesus grasped onto this splinter and pulled it out. El entered once more, and previous beliefs were restored. However, fragments that had broken off from the original splinter remained. These fragments were significant enough to taint Christ's message and confuse his followers. These fragments remained in the Old Testament and led to all sorts of evil wrongly being justified in the name of Christ. These fragments, however, were an element of Yahweh worship, and nothing Jesus would have sanctioned himself. Christ's teachings are undoubtedly the most important part of Christianity. Hence, Christians should separate elements of the Old Testament that Jesus never meant to be included or associated with him. These were the very elements that led to his persecution and torturous death. These elements being included along with his message are an insult to Jesus and all he taught. By worshiping Yahweh, the consciences of Christians will continue to be contaminated by the nature of a satanic deity whose essence is in direct opposition to the teachings of Christ. Additionally, the vast majority of the atrocities in the Bible, the evil acts in the primary biblical passages that atheists use to attack Christianity, were perpetrated by those who worshiped Yahweh. The God of this world has blinded the minds of those who don't believe. As a result, they don't see the light of the good news about Christ's glory. It is Christ who is God's image. What's more deceptive than convincing people you are God when you are Satan? If the identity of Satan in the Bible had been too apparent, he wouldn't be the deceiver of the whole world. He simply wouldn't be in a position to deceive. No, he was even camouflaged in religious texts as the Father Jesus was referring to, who is El but Yahweh. This is the extent of the deceit. It was so deeply entrenched that to this day it tricks billions. It doesn't get more deceptive than that. And not only is Yahweh referred to as a deceiver, but a great one. So from a religious perspective, he would have perfected the craft of deceit and trickery, something that greatness in this capacity would require. Thank you for watching, and if you're interested in learning more, I invite you to check out my other videos and the pinned link to my free book.